So let's finish up this series of screencasts with one last example. We're going to do one more function that returns a boolean value. We've done an example with an integer, we've done an example that returns a string, and so it makes sense that we just round this off by doing a boolean return. Now your book actually has a great example of this, and so let's just go ahead and borrow from the book and talk a little bit about this one. And we're going to basically create a function that tells us whether or not an integer is odd or even. Now we've used that concept in the past, whether using odd or even, and it might be nice to have a function if we're going to be checking that multiple times in our program, and we don't want to have to write that modulus operator every time we want to check if something's true or false. We can just create a function that does it for us and just call the function. So we'll do that first by, once again, calling function, and we'll call this is even, and we're going to pass in a number into this. And make sure I always do, when I do my functions, I usually always remember to do my opening and closing curly braces immediately so that I don't accidentally forget them at some point. So once again, we go ahead, and the first thing we're going to do, remember that we've done in the past, we checked by using an if statement, and we can use our condition in here. If num, now remember num does not have to be declared as a variable because of the fact that it's a parameter that's being passed in, and so once again the parameter is already going to be declared somewhere else, and the value is going to be passed in, and so it doesn't need to be declared again. So we do num modulus 2 is equal to 0. And we'll do my opening closing curly braces, and let's just finish this off with our else statement here with our opening and closing curly braces. And what are we going to do if the modulus of num, the modulus 2 of num equals 0? Well, we know if the remainder is 0 that this is going to be even, and since our function name is called isEven, we're going to return true if this is even, and we're going to return false if this is odd. So when we run this function in our code, it's going to say, we're going to say, yeah, give me the, is even on a number, and it'll be true if it is and false if it's not. Now one thing to note here is we've got two returns in this statement, and that's fine. You can have two returns. Just make sure that your logic is sound enough to know that when you have multiple paths inside your code, that only one return ever gets executed. I guess I say that it's kind of a misnomer because only one return will ever get executed, because the first one that happens will exit you out of your code, similar to a break does. So just be careful of that as you're creating functions inside of your code that have multiple return paths, that you've kept that in mind. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and test that out by coming up here, and let's go ahead and reuse this var num, and we're going to go ahead and say window dot alert, and we're going to say is even, and we're going to pass in this num. Now this here I did because I wanted to show you that this is okay. But I don't want you to think it's doing more than it's really doing, because num here is a completely different thing as num down here because of the variable scope that we talked about. The num inside of this function does not have any relation to the num down in this function. And as such, we can use the same variable in both functions without there being a conflict. So when we change num up here, it doesn't really affect anything in here, unless of course we take this version of num and pass it into this variable, and now, in essence they are kind of the same. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. So give me an integer 2, and we get back true because 2 is even. And let's go ahead and pass in 3, and we should get back false because 3 is false. Now just before we close this one off, I wanted to just show you one special trait about returning true and false values. Now your book touches on this, and so I kind of wanted to make sure I covered it as well. Since we are returning true and false statements, you can actually take advantage of a condition like this, which, as we know from our if statements, this statement here itself is either true or false. So this if-else statement is basically saying if true, return true, else return false. So if true, return true, else if false, return false. So we could bypass all of this code and simply say inside of our function, just return the result of this condition. So when this code runs, it's going to basically, and you can consider this being, I'm just going to put parentheses around this. You don't need the parentheses around this, but it helps you think about this as one cohesive unit. It's basically running this condition, and the result of this condition is either going to be true or false. And the logic should be the same, because if this is even, this condition will be true, and if this is odd, this condition will be false. So let's go ahead and save that and come back over here, reload that, and try again. Say 3 is false, and 2 is true. And just to, make sure that this is true, let's go ahead and, or that that you're calling the right code. Let's go ahead and just modify this so that it's actually running this code here, and reload this. I'm going to add 3 in there. It's going to say is even false. I forgot to put in a space there, but you get the point. Put the 2 in there. Is even is true. So I hope that helps. Good luck with your code this week. This should give you what you need to be able to pull off the creation of your functions in your assignment for this week. Good luck.